also, we're taking questions for future weeks. If you guys have anything that you want to ask about anything Christianity or big questions that you have, stuff like that. And also put your email down. But if you have any questions for Brent now, fire away.
And right now it is being recorded, of course, just FYIs. Yeah.
Ben?
That's not
I'm going to start with how you ended. Can you clarify this? In your body language, I detected a separation of, okay, let the metaphysicians figure out the truth, and let the scientists do their empirical thing without regard to whether it's true or not. I don't know if that's what you're saying, but that's what I heard. Can you? But then at the very end, you're encouraging both the scientist and the theologian to get up to speed with their philosophy, so as to do a better job in both. So maybe you could sort out that a little bit.
Yeah. So like I was saying, one of the things very striking to me when I read some of the ancients is their familiarity with philosophy. So when some issue is discussed, you will see a theologian or a natural philosopher, for example, appealing to these. And it's not to say that philosophy is an uncontroversial discipline, but there are a lot of agreed upon maxims of logic, for example. So both parties. So one of the things that I find really interesting reading the ancients is that they will be able to appeal to these sorts of branches of philosophy almost like a third-party arbiter. But of course, if you don't have the training in those areas of philosophy, then you can't appeal to them. And so, in some of the conflicts that I see today between science and religion, it is what I see a lot from both camps. That there doesn't seem to be like a third party that people can appeal to, like there used to be. So appeals to logic, for example, appeals to ethics, to metaphysics, sort of seems like a thing of the past. Regarding science as a discipline for models, for example, for describing and predicting phenomena, now it's called scientific anti-realism. Scientific realism would be the view that the purpose of science is to uncover like ultimate truth or the ultimate reality. That has been definitively the scope of metaphysics. I also think that's why I don't know if it's just reading more and more of the literature or that this is really happening more and more, but I see more and more professional scientists kind of condemning philosophy altogether. And I think it seems obvious the reason for that is that the majority of scientists happen to be scientific realists. And so that's the idea that the purpose of science is metaphysics. Well, if that's the purpose of science, then you don't need metaphysics anymore. It's a waste. It's something from the past, and that's exactly what you hear. And the people that are making these statements, you do a little research on them, and you find they explicitly identify as scientific realists. So I think that we've lost a third-party arbiter, essentially. Does that kind of answer what you're asking?
Are you suggesting that that the scientists and the theologian become philosophers so they can do a better job of seeking truth? Or are you suggesting that that in addition to the scientist and the theologian, we need to have a philosopher in the mix?
Ideally, for me, for for example, I think one scientist that I love listening to is Sean Carroll. He's, so far as I understand, he's got an undergrad in philosophy, but in any case, he knows his philosophy. I think that, to me, he stands out as a great scientist. So the scientists that do have philosophical training avoid a lot of careless mistakes. I think the scientists that don't have philosophical training end up making just really, really bad statements that are just really easy to pick out. And same with theologians. So it's not to say that in each of these professions they need to become professional philosophers, but a little bit of background, I think, is at least very fruitful in helping the dialogue. Because again, you do that, you've got this third party discipline that both parties can appeal to.
You talked a lot in the end of your presentation about going back to the way that science and theology have coexisted for thousands of years. But in my opinion, science as we know it today hasn't really existed before 1500 or so. I mean, you look at, for example, one element of Aristotle's theories about natural laws is that heavy objects fall faster. And all it takes is a single experiment to disprove that, right? And we didn't do that until Galileo's time. That's like 2,000 years later. So in what sense was there even any science going on before 1600?
Well, yeah. So I mean, of course, the term science didn't come around until the 1800s. Up until then, it was natural philosophy,
which was this very different from the way that we experience science today, right? For example, you have Aristotle positing that heavy objects fall faster, but there was nobody got the idea to actually test that out. There was no need for experimental confirmation.
Sure, go ahead.
There was a Greek philosopher that theorized that the earth was round, and he proposed doing a experiment separated by thousands of miles apart. And that was in the, so there were experiments, but it wasn't formalized.
And I would say
it's clearly not very common to
Well, I would say that-
experimentally confirm your ideas.
Correct.
Well,
But it
I would
exists.
say you start to see more and more of that in the Middle Ages. So autopsies became the church started encouraging autopsies, for example, experiments on animal corpses.
So, what kind of experiments?
Um,
Other than
Causes of death, for example.
it's, the way I understand it is, yeah, they would study, like open them up, study the Venus system, because they were looking at things like the Venus system and everything like that, but they were just like studying it. I don't know of any experiments that they did to figure out, well, this blunt force trauma was caused 3 days ago, and if we turn the body, the bilirubin is gonna, or the Billy, whatever is gonna go to the bottom of the cadaver, and we'll know what side he was laying on. I don't think that kind of science, the kind of science that we do today, that we know today, and this is what he's saying, was really uniformly practiced until, around the 1600s.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's the crux of his argument, is that there really was no formal science being done. We would observe and we would look at things, but we wouldn't really, very few people would actually come to any actual conclusions to pull us forward like we have today.
Yeah, as far as like a formalized system of experimentation, yeah, I think both of you are right. So like that didn't really become formalized until, for example, Roger Bacon his Novum Organum, or the sort of the scientific method, whatever you want to call that, really became formalized. Empirical tests, he was very big on empiricism. So yeah, I mean, I agree with you.
So I have a question. You made a remark about nature being inherently good, and I didn't catch the whole remark. Are you saying that that's what you find that, or is it, are you neutral on that, or what were you exactly trying to say about nature being inherently good?
So like for the Greeks, for example, which had a dominant influence on academia back then, nature is inherently bad. The ultimate goal for a person is to escape this corrupted body. Again, even Dante puts hell just a little bit underneath the earth. Like Galileo said that he wanted that heliocentrism would elevate the earth from the sewage of the universe. So the Aristotelian paradigm had it, especially coming from Plato, that the physical is something that we need to escape from. It's inherently bad. But it's explicit in Scripture. In Genesis, for example, God saw, he created, and it was very good. The idea of a general resurrection, that everybody will receive bodies eternally, so that bodies are, the physical is a good thing. It's something that we can't live without. This is a part of the Judeo-Christian.
So why can't nature be not good or bad, just is nature, like it just exists? I mean, why does it have to be inherently good or inherently bad?
I don't know that it, I don't know that it necessarily does. I mean, I think that what's important are especially the impediments to progress. So if nature is evil, I guess another way to say it, if nature just is, I think that at least opens up the possibility of experimentation or a motivation to investigate. But if it's evil, if it's illusory, if it's not really there,
I think that's just kind of subjective, where the objective is just exists, and we people see it as, if we see something that's good, we're gonna say, oh, that's really great. If we saw something like, I don't mean to gross you out, but say these little worms that embed themselves in the eyes of people and cattle, well, to me that's not very good, but I mean it really is it's also doing its thing.
yeah.
So I think that is really a subjective statement on something that's objectively neutral.
Subjective
The
statement?
subjective is how you see it. If you see your child being born and you say, oh, nature is so great, look what we've done, that's going to be good to you.
Mm-hmm.
But if you see, a parasite growing in something, you're going to say, oh, that's terrible, that's
mm-hmm.
bad, that's evil, it's terrible.
Mm-hmm.
But really, both are it's just an objective thing. You see it, it doesn't have any good or bad qualities until we put those qualities on it. But to stand alone, I think that nature just is. I mean, it has no good or bad. It's just, it's not a thinking, breathing entity, it
mm-hmm.
just is something.
Mm-hmm.
So that statement it kind of made me kind of pop my head a little bit, I guess.
Well, I think that was actually kind of more his point. He was saying that what the Greeks had believed
Right.
was that the physical realm is bad.
Okay.
And so people perceived the world as bad and did
Right.
not find motivation to pursue a greater understanding of
I
it,
see.
with exceptions.
Okay.
Whereas later on, when people turned away from how do you say it, Aristotelian? Aristotelian, when they turned away from that way of thinking, the idea was more, okay, so the physical realm is good, or at the very least, okay. Not good as in like morally good, but it's.
Oh, okay. I see, I understand now. I wasn't
It's
sure.
worth investigating.
Okay, I just was looking for a little more clarification.
He did it better than I did. Thank you.
Speaking of,
Actually, I want to amplify on his answer, which is something you mentioned. Because what the distinctions from your talk is why the West had science and the East didn't. It's not just Aristotle that thinks the physical is bad, but the whole essence of Buddhism is that the physical is bad. The whole essence of trying to achieve a separation from it is demotivating to studying it. You know, why would I study what I'm trying to get away from? I might observe something accidentally, but I'm not motivated to devote my life to it. And so I think it's more universal than just the West or Aristotle, which is a point you made.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah. I mean, at least it seems to. I mean, the question remains: why did this kind of discipline not arise in these areas? I mean, that's just a fact. And this does seem. I mean, this seems to explain it. Marco.
So let's say that your talk presents a very convincing account of how religion and science were not in conflict before 1870. But what about after 1870? I mean, the title of the talk is Christianity Anti-Science Present Tense. And so you can talk a lot about, you know, the historical motivations for science and that sort of thing. But it seems that everything in your talk is compatible with the idea that the conflict between religion and science really became sparked after Darwin, so the late 1800s, because that's when you really. So my question is, well, it's more really a comment that I'm looking for a response to. I think that somebody could respond to your presentation with the thesis that science and religion maybe were not in explicit conflict before 1850, but that they definitely are now, because the title of the presentation is Christianity Anti-Science Present Tense. And it's not, was Christianity anti-science in 1450? And so, you know, one could argue that a lot of the real inflammatory material came out after 1850, where you had Darwin, and then you have the rise of modern geology, the rise of modern physics, and then genetics, just solidifying everything. And so now you have a lot of material for theologians and creationists to object to, whereas you didn't really have any inflammatory material before 1850. So it sort of calls into question the relevance of everything that happened before 1850. That's more talking about the motivations for science rather than the actual practice of science as we experience it today.
Yeah, so that is a really good comment and question. Yeah, what I should have spelled out more is that these were the motivations, like you said, that seem to have given rise to what we call modern science. What I meant to say explicitly is that I think that those motivations are still there. I mean, I think that those motivations are still there in science for, you know, scientists that are religious or not. But so of course one of the things to say is that, I mean, there's not like some thing out there that's just floating around in space called science, and there's not some thing out there called Christianity floating around. There are people that are scientists, and there are people that are Christians. So really the question becomes, are most Christians anti-science, or vice versa? And well, so I mean that's really the point of, if that's fair to say, then that becomes the point of the end of the presentation. Philosophy is arbitrary. So I'm a scientific anti-realist. I think that the purpose of science is X, you know, what we talk about. To produce models that describe phenomena, that predict phenomena, that bring benefit to humanity, those sorts of things. And so when I view science that way, I don't see any conflict between, I see really very little. So it's hard to find conflict between science and Christianity. I mean, it's almost like saying, is there a conflict between math and Christianity? So I think that if you view science that way, then you see very little conflict. Those that are scientific realists, I think that they will come to find certain scientific theories that do come into conflict with Christianity. And so that's sort of my call for let's take a look at what the purpose of science is.
Are you prepared today to defend scientific anti-realism on camera? I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I would be. Yeah, well, I'll just give you one. You're familiar with Thomas Kuhn?
Yeah.
So I think that on scientific realism, that it's difficult to say that science has progressed. I think that if you want to say that science has progressed, you need to be a scientific anti-realist. And I think that science has progressed. So the reason I say that is, so Kuhn is famous for his quote unquote the idea of paradigm shifts, where if you're so for Kuhn, what we have throughout the history of science are these entire paradigms that are behind a theory. So Newton's or Leibniz's or Descartes' view of the universe as these little billiard balls of representing atoms physically bouncing off each other is one kind of paradigm of what the universe is. Again, it's a metaphysical position. And then you come to modern physics, and you have, so like, if we're scientific realists, we're going to have to say that you know, Newton's conception of the universe was just wrong. He was wrong about the nature of gravity, the nature of atoms. You come to Einstein, it was a completely a total paradigm shift of ultimate ideas, of ultimate truth. And so, given Kuhn, and Kuhn kind of brings us out with like a thought experiment where he says, you know, the way that I interpret it, you look up in the sky, you see a little white dot slowly moving across the sky with a little white stream behind it, and you say airplane. And Kuhn will ask, well, the moment that you say airplane, you get this mental image of a large metal object with wings and passengers on it and a pilot driving thing, but that's not at all what you observe. What you observe is a tiny little tiny dot with a little white stream behind it. So that's his famous line that all observation is theory laden, meaning there's no such thing as pure observation. Whatever we observe has these background beliefs attached to it. And so it's difficult to say that two people are actually observing the same thing because their background beliefs are coming to play on their observations. And so that gets into paradigm shifts where when one theory replaces another, that it doesn't necessarily progress. One paradigm just replaces another. So, however, on scientific anti-realism, you can, where accuracy of models, mathematical accuracy, for example, you can easily say that Ptolemy was 95% accurate in his predictions. Copernicus was about the same. Newton, 99%. Einstein, 99.9%. So you can make the case on scientific anti-realism that there is progress in science. I think it's tough to do that on scientific realism.
Progress toward what?
Well, if you're an anti-realist,
And it's
toward,
not truth, right?
no, it's accuracy.
Does accuracy imply truth? Does it get you closer?
No, I don't think so. I think it's mathematical accuracy.
Okay, so if I practice an experiment 1,000,000 times in a row and get the same result every time, like dropping a marker on the ground, and I say, okay, the marker's going to end up on the ground, and that's my scientific prediction, and I do that 1,000,000 times, and I have 100% accuracy. Are you saying that that says nothing about the truth of whether the marker will end up on the ground?
No, absolutely it does. So what I'm
I think you're actually a scientific realist.
well, no. So what I would say is that science absolutely bears on metaphysics. So in metaphysics, we need to take what we've discovered in science, what our models have shown, and then discuss in metaphysics what does that mean for truth value. But I think truth is a metaphysical question.
I'm a little uncomfortable with your narrow definition of truth.
I'm not sure what my definition of truth is.
Well, part of it is that it's a metaphysical concept. There are historical truths. We may not be able to find them, but they happened, and that's got nothing to do with metaphysics.
So what distinction would you want to make about truth?
The distinction I'd like to propose is, as difficult as it might be to measure, truth is what actually is. That's a metaphysical concept of what truth is, but it doesn't make truth only a metaphysical issue. One of the things I'm a little uncomfortable with is you're discounting a lot of scientific truths, which I would argue that science has progressed as opposed to belief systems have not progressed, because there are things that by the scientific method we show their limitations. So we've progressed from a universal concept of particles being little balls bouncing against each other. But in fact, what science progressed on was saying that applies to, for example, electrical engineering models of how to run power through wires. I can use that model. It's a limitation. I'm not going to put a metaphysical truth to it to say that material actually is little balls bouncing off of each other. But science did progress from the ideas that spontaneous combustion is how fires start with oily rags in the corner. So we've made progress by discounting some things that are pure belief systems, as opposed to subjective belief systems can't progress, because if I believe something independent of a scientific method, even if I learn it's false, 50 years from now, somebody else can come along with exactly that same belief, and there is no technique for discounting it. Whereas we in science have this technique of, I can propose an experiment, and even if you believe it's false, so your example of dropping a ball 1,000,000 times isn't nearly as scientifically impressive as not only when he drops it 1,000,000 times, but he hands it to you and you drop it 1,000,000 times. And you say, no, it's gonna float, watch. But if I believe that the spirits are telling me something, there's absolutely nothing you can do to disprove that, or anything inside.
Can I add something to that before you respond? So I was gonna say that, you could argue that Thomas Kuhn's thesis is essentially a criticism of the way that science has been practiced as being too religious in some ways, because you have scientists of one paradigm dogmatically holding to their theories, and then evidence comes forward promoting a new paradigm, and you have these incommensurable theories that clash, and that would never happen if you didn't have dogmatic scientists on one end. So you can see his whole revolutions in science thesis as a criticism of dogma being too difficult to overcome in the way that science is practiced. So that relates to what he said about, in science your ideas can be challenged because you say the ball's gonna float, and then you do it a million times and you're wrong time and time again. So you can comment on that.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. I mean, that's Kuhn's idea of normal science. Normal scientists in the normal science paradigm are not going to give up their normal science when a new paradigm comes along. So I think that there's scientific anti-realism scientific anti-realism. I think you can easily make the case that science does progress, and that's not. So when I say that, it becomes more and more accurate. I'm not at all saying that there's no truth value in science, and that's not at all the scientific anti-realist position. All that the scientific anti-realist is saying is that when we make these discoveries in nature, and we let's say that we know them to be true. It's not to say that well, if a scientist says it, then it's false. It's just to say that there's a metaphysical method and there's a scientific method.
I want to give a quote or paraphrase that actually supports the dichotomy you're describing without attributing one to truth. And this in particular comes from Einstein, who was an ardent, I won't call him a theist, but he was an ardent valued religion without being typical Christianity. And his comment was, science is the truth about how things work, what actually happens. Religion is about why things should happen. And I think that's the distinction you're making between natural science and identifying phenomena, and metaphysics of deciding truth as in what should be, as opposed to physically what's observed. Is that close?
I think it is, and Einstein was extremely interested in philosophy. That's one of the things I love about him. So I think I would absolutely agree with him.
I guess I'd like to introduce to you a paraphrase of the common question of science versus religion, or science versus theology. The real conflict is between scientists and theologians.
Exactly. Right. Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, science is something that humans do. It's not some object out there that runs around conflicting with something called Christianity.
But I think his question, you let your question kind of slide, and I thought before the video the real key question was, you gave a historical perspective where actually, in general, in studies before the 1800s, certainly before the 1900s, almost every educated person was a generalist. There weren't specialists like we have
Right.
now.
Mm-hmm.
And so you gave an example of the conflict between theology and religion and Christianity and natural science wasn't there before, and I think he had made a legitimate question of, don't we really think it came about somewhere in the 1850s, not because of the particular theories or the changes of theology, but the specialization that a person can be. There's so much science now, there's nobody that knows all of it. There's the notebook full of science facts is so big that that's what brought it about, more so than that it's just not natural to not compute. Did I paraphrase your question wrong?
No, I don't think so, although in my opinion, I would say that it was the things that science was coming up with that inflamed the conflict. And he's saying it's specialization, which is something that you can talk about.
Well, no, I was talking about it being the volume of science. No, that the turnaround.
I mean,
yes,
yeah,
I understood this.
Darwin was somewhat of a specialist, so that wouldn't have been possible a few hundred years before that. And so because he went so far into biology, that allowed him to come up with these elaborate claims that then people started to reject. And then you have geology becoming much more advanced, and that started to challenge like the age of the earth and all this stuff. And so yeah, that wouldn't have been possible if you didn't have dedicated geologists, dedicated biologists like Darwin. So.
And well, you've brought up geology a couple of times. The beginnings of geology is really interesting, actually. It came from a French, I can't remember his name. He was a Christian, and it was really interesting. Again, he thought that Earth history was like a book. He thought that it was impossible. He said it was in principle impossible to explain Earth history based on natural causes, but rather that it has a contingent history. So that it must be a bottom up. So if you look at, he kind of made the example of following a commons trail, and based on natural laws, you can derive its history. But the Earth, again, he was a Christian. He thought that God actually erupted into Earth history, and so therefore, in principle, if we want to learn about Earth history, we have to start digging, look at different strata, because it is a contingent history. Anyway, it's just kind of funny that geology itself came from the beginning. Really started by a Christian. I'm trying to think back to your point.
The point is, there was so much scientific information available in 1850, which I think is the meat of your question. I really shouldn't have brought in the specialty literature. Before that, there wasn't any conflict because there wasn't so much scientific information. At that point, there became so much scientific information that people could identify conflicts. Is that a clearer? Okay.
But I think they can only identify conflicts with their human understanding of what they've constructed Christianity to be.
Exactly. It's the interpretation,
Yeah.
it's the conflict.
Yeah,
Not the
exactly.
data.
So at the end of the day, I don't know. I mean, I study, my master's is science and religion. So actually, most of my classmates, almost every one of my professors, are working scientists. So they're huge supporters of science, and so in most of my circles, I don't meet a lot of Christians. I can't think of any Christians really that I know that are anti-science. Of course, that's anecdotal, but I would say that if I did meet one, I would say that you've sold out your mother, kind of.
I think it's interesting, your circle, that you've never met a Christian.
I mean, I won't say never, but I'm having trouble thinking of one that's
I've met
anti-science.
Lots.
It's a shame. I mean, I would say that that's a vice.
Well, define what you mean also by anti-science, like elaborate a little
Yeah.
on that. Because what I've seen is more like, it's like this fear of like, oh no, my child's gonna lose their faith if they study science, or like, you know, a lot of times these people are honestly like people who majored in not science, so, you know,
Mhm.
but, no.
Well, an example of anti-science is young Earth creationists. There are a lot of young Earth creationists that if you start discussing with them geological evidence, in Texas, in Dallas, there's a young Earth creationist museum about 40 miles down the road from the Dinosaur Museum.
Yeah.
And they've got books and books on the theory of how the dinosaur footprint just down the road was in the mud with a human footprint, so it clearly isn't old. And this is a lot larger movement, not more lot. You'll find a whole lot of people.
45% of the population.
Oh yeah, that's a
What
huge.
40% of the population are young Earth creationists.
40% of what population?
United
American
States.
population.
I don't.
I had seen pretty big numbers. So again,
And there's
like,
other anti-science too. There's anti-science about a lot of biological things.
Mhm.
And there's
So-
certainly anti-scientist people about evolution.
yeah, so that's why I bring up the intelligent design evolution dispute. And that's exactly what I'm saying is, I think I think the intelligent design movement is bringing in so much metaphysics into science, and same with the young earthers.
Having met lots of, read the Intelligent Design Journal, they've brought the tapestry of science into metaphysics. They really haven't brought metaphysics into science.
Well, I should say that I think that they're attempting to. So the attempt is to say, I mean, I think that there's a lot of interesting stuff in intelligent design, but when they say the position of, you know, William Dembski, Stephen Myers, is to say that God should be a scientific hypothesis. And what I'm saying is, that's just metaphysics. That's saying metaphysics should be brought into science.
And I hope we agree that shouldn't be done.
I do disagree with that. Because I am a scientific anti-realist. I think that's a discussion for metaphysics.
But I'm confused because I thought your closing point was that the scientist and the theologian should get up to speed with their philosophy and integrate it in, so.
I think that each branch of philosophy informs each other. I don't think that like science and metaphysics should integrate. I think there are two different disciplines. They talk to each other, and they can talk to each other through other philosophical disciplines. So I think that what we learn in science should be discussed in metaphysics. I mean, it is all the time.
How is that not integration and understanding? I'm hearing two things. I'm hearing, on the one hand, we should keep them separate, but on the other hand, we should bring them together.
Okay, so for example, like when a politician makes a moral proposition, and I don't know, Steven Pinker comes to bear on the issue or something, ethicist. I don't think that when that happens, that all of a sudden we have a third discipline. We still have a politician and an ethicist. And the two are informing each other. The politician has made a statement, the ethicist should know a little bit about the political climate, and vice versa, that the politician should know a little bit about ethics. But I don't think that that means that the two integrate into a third discipline. They talk to each other.
I think to paraphrase, what I think he's saying isn't the merging of metaphysics and science. It's that people who are studying metaphysics should also look at science, but not confuse scientific truth with metaphysical truth. The same in science. If I'm looking at a scientific study, I can look at metaphysics, I can inform them, but I don't confuse scientific facts and scientific studies with metaphysical studies. Just as I study French and I study science, what?
That's exactly it.
So, we're technically done with our meeting, but, we
We're
have the
almost
room
a half
till
hour over.
well, we have the room till 4:45, right? Yeah.
Well, you advertise till 4:30.
Yeah, we're
so we have the
4:30,
room till
so.
4:45, but, anyway, so one thought that I had about all of this is that, Christians can agree to disagree about some things that relate to science. So, we were talking about young earth creationists, and there's other ideas about, the creation and how that actually came to be and things like that. And we can agree to disagree on those things. We don't have to agree on that necessarily, although it's really important and it's good to think through critically, for sure. But there are certain essentials in Christianity that we all do agree on. So just to kind of put that in perspective, for everybody, depending on where you're coming from, if you hold to different views of the creation account, things like that. So, we want to be charitable to each other if we have different viewpoints on this kind of non-essential things. Yeah, so thank you, Brent.
Yeah,
Thanks
That's
for
great.
having me.
And if anybody wants to hang out afterwards in the hallway,